My son locked me in a room, took my phone, and ignored my desperate pleas to call an ambulance. In his twisted mind, he thought letting me die would be the fastest way to put his hands on my inheritance. I am just an old sick father to him, a mere obstacle standing between him and the fortune he believes he deserves. But fate has its own plans. 3 days later, when he finally opened the door, what he saw made him scream. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what time it is where you are right now. The front door felt heavier than I remembered. My 2 weeks in the hospital had weakened more than just my heart. It had weakened my spirit, but not broken it. My hands shook violently as I turned the key. That familiar click should have been a comfort, a sound that meant I was home. Instead, it echoed through the hallway like a warning, a reminder that home was no longer mine. "I'm home," I whispered, though my voice trembled with more than exhaustion. Ethan didn't even glance up from his laptop. He sat sprawled in my chair, the chair that had always been mine, the chair where I had spent countless evenings reading stories to him as a boy. Now he sat in it as though he owned the place. Perhaps he believed he did. Celeste emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She offered a smile, but it was thin, hollow, the kind you give out of politeness rather than warmth. "Oscar, you look better," she said softly, but the hesitation in her tone betrayed her. I set down my suitcase and the medical discharge, papers scanning the living room that had been mine for nearly 4 decades. But the room didn't welcome me. It mocked me. The mantelpiece where our family photographs had once proudly stood was bare. The bookshelf no longer carried the weight of memory. It held newer, shinier books arranged by color, not by meaning. Even the old lamp my late wife Sarah had fallen in love with at a garage sale was gone. "Where are my things?" I asked, my voice already breaking. Celeste glanced at Ethan before answering. "We were just cleaning up." "Oscar, it was getting so cluttered." Cluttered. The words stung like poison on my tongue. These weren't just objects. They were the fragments of a life, my life. Finally, Ethan raised his eyes, his expression cool and detached. "Dad, we need to talk about this house's future." The future, I repeated. To him, I was already a ghost. To him, my surgery had been my funeral, and my survival nothing but an inconvenience. I walked slowly toward the garage, my surgical scar tugging painfully with each step. My chest ached, but not from the operation. No, this pain came from seeing my entire existence stuffed into cardboard boxes. Tools I had worked with for 40 years. Photo albums, their spines worn from the touch of love. Sarah's recipe cards, each one labeled in Celeste's handwriting, yet now shoved carelessly aside. On the boxes, bold black letters read, "Oscar's items, storage, storage," as though I were already dead. "Why are my things in boxes?" I demanded. Ethan appeared in the garage doorway, his silhouette blocking my way back to the house. "We thought you might be more comfortable with a different arrangement," he said flatly. "Different arrangement," my voice cracked like brittle leather. "This is my house, son." His arms crossed over his chest, the posture of a stranger wearing the face of the boy I once raised. "Actually, Dad, we've been thinking. You're not getting any younger. The stairs are dangerous for someone in your condition." My condition. The words cut deep. Not once during my hospital stay had he visited. Not once had he called. He didn't know my condition. He didn't care. "The doctor cleared me for normal activities," I said, my throat tightening. "The doctor doesn't live here." Ethan snapped, his voice carrying a sharpness I had never heard before. It was final, cruel, like a door slamming shut. "We do. We, not you, me, and Celeste. Just we. The couple who had already claimed my home while I lay fighting for my life." The evening shadows crept across the garage floor, stretching toward me like cold, accusing fingers. This house I had built with my own 2 hands, suddenly felt like a tomb, and I was the intruder inside it. I looked at my son, and for the first time I did not recognize him. His eyes, once filled with wonder when I taught him to ride his first bike, now held nothing but calculation. No warmth, no love, no memory of the father who had raised him. Slowly, painfully, I climbed the stairs to what was once my bedroom. Each step was a battle, each breath a small victory over the ache in my chest. Behind me I heard their whispers, the soft murmur of a conversation I was never meant to hear, and I realized with a crushing clarity that surviving the hospital was only half the fight. The real battle had just begun. Downstairs, Ethan and Celeste were whispering voices so low I couldn't catch the words, but I didn't need to. I knew. They were planning something. Planning for a future where I didn't exist, where their lives weren't slowed down by the inconvenient presence of an old man who refused to die on schedule. I closed the bedroom door behind me. At least here things hadn't changed much. The same bed sagged in the middle, the same view of the street stretched beyond the blinds where old Hal Jenkins would wave from his porch each morning with the same cheerful consistency. A few of the family photos still sat on the nightstand, though fewer than before. Their absence stung more than the fading scar on my chest. I sank heavily onto the mattress, the discharge papers from the hospital crinkling in my lap. Forcing a deep breath, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow will be better. It has to be." Tonight was just shock, the unease of returning to a house that didn't quite feel like mine anymore. Families needed time to adjust, just as hearts did. Healing didn't happen overnight. At least that's what I told myself. But downstairs the sounds betrayed me. The clink of dishes being washed, the low rumble of the television, Celeste's soft laughter, all the noises of a comfortable home. A home that seemed to belong entirely to them now. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar creaks and sighs of my house settling into the night, I realized something awful. I felt lonelier here than I had in that sterile hospital room. Hours slipped by. Ethan's footsteps eventually moved across the kitchen floor, then up the stairs and finally past my door, without slowing. No knock, no goodnight. No checking if I needed water, or if I was warm enough, or if my chest hurt. Just silence followed by the soft click of their bedroom door closing, shutting me out. I lay there in the dark, one hand pressed over the jagged line across my chest, where surgeons had cracked me open and stitched me back together. My body was nearly healed, but something inside me, something invisible, felt shattered beyond repair. When sleep finally came, it dragged me under like deep water. I woke to pain. A crushing, unbearable weight pressed down on my chest as though someone stood there with both feet. My heart stuttered violently, each beat like a hammer pounding against bone. The digital clock glowed 7:30 a.m., but the light bleeding through the blinds was too sharp, too harsh for morning. My mouth was dry as sandpaper. When I tried to sit up, the room tilted violently, pitching me sideways. This wasn't the dull soreness of recovery. No, this was something else. This was the pain Dr. Simmons had warned me about with that careful, deliberate voice of his. If you feel chest pressure, shortness of breath, or sudden dizziness, don't wait. Call an ambulance immediately. I reached for the water glass on my nightstand, but my arm felt as though it were made of stone, impossibly heavy. Even lifting my head sent waves of nausea ripping through me. Sweat broke across my forehead despite the morning chill, and I gasped for air that didn't seem to reach my lungs. The phone. I needed the phone. It sat across the room on top of the dresser, a dozen steps away. It might as well have been a mile. I forced myself forward, but my legs buckled instantly, dumping me back against the mattress. Fire ripped through my chest where the surgical scar stretched, reminding me just how fragile the repairs really were. Ambulance, I whispered hoarsely, trying to remember the doctor's precise instructions, the checklist of symptoms that meant danger. This definitely qualifies. I tried again, louder this time, summoning what little strength I had left. Ethan. My voice broke into a croak. Ethan, help me. Ethan, silence. Then faintly the sound of coffee brewing drifted up from the kitchen, the cheerful hum of the morning news from the television, the normal careless soundtrack of a morning lived by people whose hearts weren't failing them. My heart thundered harder, weaker, at the same time as if trying to keep me alive and failing. I pushed off the mattress again, dragging myself across the floor inch by inch. My fingers clawed at the carpet, every movement blurring my vision, until the edges went gray. The dresser, the phone was still impossibly far, but if I didn't reach it, I wasn't sure I'd ever rise again. The pain in my chest sharpened until it felt like a fist made of fire, squeezing my heart and sending flames down my left arm. My breath came in ragged, shallow bursts, each one harder than the last. Clutching the door frame with trembling fingers, I tried to anchor myself against the tidal wave of agony. Ethan, I shouted again, every ounce of strength poured into the cry. My throat burned as though I'd swallowed glass. From below came the sound of footsteps, slow and hurried. And then his voice floated up from the bottom of the stairs, casual, detached. "What is it, Dad? What is it?" As if I were complaining about a dripping faucet, as if I were asking him to replace a light bulb. The desperation in my tone hadn't pierced him at all. "I feel terrible," I gasped, forcing the words past my cramping chest. "Really terrible." "Call an ambulance." Silence followed. Not the frantic rustle of a phone being grabbed, not the hurried thump of footsteps racing up the stairs, just silence. A pause long enough for the edges of my vision to pulse gray. I slid down the wall, the cool plaster pressing against my back. My legs folded beneath me as I hit the floor. The phone sat across the room, unreachable, mocking me from atop the dresser. In the mirror's reflection, I saw a stranger staring back, a gray-faced old man with wild, desperate eyes, hair plastered to his forehead, with sweat pajamas clinging damply to his body. That couldn't be me. But it was. If Sarah were still alive, she wouldn't have hesitated. She would already be on the phone with 911, her hand gripping mine tightly, her voice steady and strong as she talked me through it. She would have told me I wasn't alone, that everything would be all right. But Sarah was gone. And in her place was Ethan, my son, standing just 14 steps away, unwilling to climb them, unwilling to save me. The pain spread across my chest like acid spilling across fragile skin, eating through every defense. The surgeon's voice echoed in my memory, clinical and cold. "Your heart is delicate. Stress can undo the repairs. If anything feels wrong, don't wait. Don't. Minutes matter. Statistics for men your age are unforgiving." I was no longer a man in that moment. I was a number teetering on the edge of becoming part of a statistic. "Ethan, please." I begged again, my voice breaking, weaker than before. The strength was leaving me with every labored breath. This time, finally, there was movement. A chair scraping against the floor. The sound of someone standing. Footsteps at last. Relief surged through me, even though the pain only deepened. He was coming. Finally, he was coming. The stairs groaned beneath his weight. One step, another. But not the rushed clatter of someone sprinting to save a life. No, these were measured steps. Calm, deliberate. The steps of someone fulfilling an obligation, not answering a desperate cry. Still, he was on his way. That was something. I dragged myself upright, pressing my shoulder into the wall, trying to look less broken than I felt. I didn't want him to see me this weak, this pitiful, though weakness was all I had left. My body had already betrayed me once. Now it was betraying me again. "Dad." His voice reached me at last, flat, carrying only the mild concern one might use when asking about a neighbor's sick pet. In here, I rasped my lips, barely forming the words. "Hurry." The bedroom door creaked open. Ethan stood there, framed in the doorway. His hair stuck up in uneven tufts, his pajamas wrinkled, his face groggy from sleep. His eyes swept over me, slumped against the wall, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, every inch of me screaming with pain. He took it all in, and then nothing. His expression remained calm, utterly calm, as though he had been expecting this all along. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his tone maddeningly flat, as though he genuinely couldn't tell, as though it weren't obvious, as though a man gasping for air, clutching his chest, begging for help, might be exaggerating. I forced the words out through clenched teeth, each syllable tearing at my throat. "Call, quickly. I feel terrible." He stepped further into the room, but there was no urgency in his movements. His eyes flickered across the scene with a kind of detached curiosity, like an inspector evaluating a problem, rather than a son facing his father's dying pleas. His gaze lingered on my phone across the room, then shifted to me, then back again. And then he said it. "No, Dad. I won't call." The words struck me harder than the pain in my chest. They froze the air in my lungs. They crushed me in a way no disease ever could. "What are you saying?" My voice cracked. "I could die." Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't rush forward. Instead, he walked past me, his footsteps slow and deliberate, and stopped at the dresser. My phone sat there, my only lifeline. With a smooth, practiced motion, he picked it up, slipped it into his pocket, and turned back toward me with calm finality. Maybe he said that would be for the best. The room went dead silent except for the jagged, uneven rhythm of my breathing. I stared at him, the boy I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had scraped every penny to pay. I stared at him and saw no son, only a stranger wearing his face. Ethan! What? My voice broke into a whisper, not just from weakness, but from heartbreak. The pain in my chest surged, but this wasn't only arteries failing or surgical repairs straining. No, something deeper had snapped, something essential between us. Your old dad, sick. He spoke in a measured, almost casual tone, as though listing groceries. This house is worth $300,000. Celeste and I have plans. Plans. The word landed like a stone. Plans that don't include supporting an invalid. Invalid. The word cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't just cruel, it erased me, reduced my entire existence to a burden. I'm your father, I whispered. He didn't hesitate. You're a burden. He turned then, walking toward the door with that same unhurried pace, as though none of this were urgent, as though my gasping, trembling body on the floor was merely background noise. His hand rested on the doorknob. And burdens, he added coldly, have a way of resolving themselves. No. I tried to push myself up to reach him, to grab his shoulders and shake some shred of humanity back into him. But my body betrayed me. My legs gave way instantly. My arms collapsed under me. I crumpled against the wall, my chest screaming, my breath torn into fragments. Ethan, please, I begged, tears burning at the edges of my vision. Please, I need help. He paused at the threshold. For one fleeting moment, his eyes softened, and I thought I saw pity. But there was no warmth behind it, only something cold, detached, clinical. No, Dad, he said. You need to accept reality, and then click. The door closed. The lock slid into place. Ethan. My fist pounded weakly against the door, each strike stealing the last of my strength. Open this door. What are you doing? But the only reply was silence. Then slowly his footsteps retreated down the hall. Down the stairs, back into the comfort of his morning routine. Back to his coffee, back to his plans, back to a future where I was already dead. I slumped against the door, the pounding in my chest now competing with a different agony, one no doctor could heal. My son, my only child, the boy I had loved unconditionally, had just sentenced me to death. Not with rage, not with violence, but with cold calculation, with the casual cruelty of someone swatting away a fly. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air thick and stifling. The walls pressed in closer, the silence heavier. No phone, no escape. And downstairs the sounds of normal life continued unbroken. The clatter of dishes, the hum of the television, the hiss of the coffee maker. The ordinary soundtrack of a future they were building on my grave. I pressed my ear to the door, straining for even the faintest hint of conscience in my son's voice. Some sign that he might reconsider. That the boy I had raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, was still buried somewhere inside this man. But instead of compassion, I heard the murmur of Ethan's voice, low and satisfied. Then Celeste's laugh, bright, careless, cruel. It cut through the air like broken glass, sharp and heartless. That laugh turned my blood cold. The scar across my chest throbbed, burning like a brand. I thought of all the hours in that sterile hospital room surrounded by machines that beeped to keep me alive. All the needles, the medications, the whispered reassurances from nurses who told me I was a fighter. All of it just so I could return home, to die alone, locked in my own bedroom, abandoned by the people I had trusted the most. But I wasn't dead yet, and if Ethan thought I would give him the satisfaction of dying quietly, conveniently, like a problem that solved itself, then he didn't know his father. Not really. Something deep inside me stirred, a stubbornness forged from 68 years of survival. I had lived through 2 wars. I had buried the love of my life. I had carried the weight of grief heavier than this failing body. If I could endure all that I could endure this, I had survived worse things than death. I had survived my son, the window, my eyes dragged toward it with new purpose. Beyond that glass was Hal Jenkins' house. Hal, who had been my neighbor for 15 years, who waved at me every morning like clockwork, who had asked about my recovery only last week with genuine concern in his eyes. If I could just reach him, if I could get his attention, there might still be hope. The thought gave me strength. Inch by inch, I crawled toward the window. Every movement was agony, my chest screaming in protest, but each shuffle forward felt like a victory. Sweat poured down my face. My arms trembled. Still, I pushed on. When I finally reached the window, I pressed my palm against the cold glass, dragging myself up just enough to see the street below. My heart stumbled in my chest, but I forced myself to focus. There the newspaper still lay on Hal's driveway. He would come soon, coffee mug in hand, ready to start another ordinary day in an ordinary neighborhood. A neighborhood where sons didn't lock their fathers away to die. All I had to do was hold on. All I had to do was survive long enough to catch his eye. I wasn't going to make Ethan's plan easy. Yes, the pain was real dangerous, possibly fatal. Every beat of my heart felt like it might be the last. But my son's betrayal hurt deeper. And between the two, I knew which one I was going to fight harder. The silence in the hallway after Ethan's footsteps faded felt like death itself, thick, heavy, suffocating. I slid down with my back pressed against the locked door until I crumpled onto the carpet like a discarded rag. The fibers scratched against my palms. Sarah's carpet. She'd picked it out during our 3rd year of marriage, insisting the warm pattern would make the house feel more like a home. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me, but instead of comfort, it brought sorrow. How had it come to this? Where was the boy I raised? The boy who once cried for hours after accidentally stepping on a spider, guilt eating him alive until I told him accidents happen. The boy who hugged me so tightly after his first Little League home run that I thought my ribs might crack. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man whose laughter with his wife downstairs felt like a death sentence to me. My chest tightened again, the vice closing harder. Pain radiated down my left arm like molten iron, stealing my breath with each wave. Every inhale felt like it could be my last. The doctor's warnings came back in fragments, broken pieces of memory rattling in my brain. If there's sudden onset of chest pain, if there's shortness of breath, don't hesitate. It could be fatal. Fatal. The word echoed heavy as a coffin lid while I clung to the carpet and fought to keep my eyes open. That was exactly what Ethan was counting on. My own son. The words echoed inside me like a curse, bitter and unreal. My son. The boy I once carried on my shoulders, who once looked at me as though I hung the very stars in the sky. Was he really waiting for me to die? Does he truly want me gone? I whispered into the emptiness, the sound barely a ghost swallowed by the thick silence of my prison. Even my own voice sounded foreign weak, like it belonged to some other man who had already been forgotten. My mind, desperate for air, for something human to cling to, drifted back to the driveway below this very window. I could still see Ethan there, 6, maybe 7, wobbling on his first bicycle. His knees were knobby, his hair impossible to tame, no matter how much Celeste smoothed it down, and that gap-toothed grin stretched across his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Don't let go yet, Dad," he'd shouted, legs pumping furiously, eyes wild with determination. And then that moment of magic, my hand releasing the back of the seat, his tiny body finding balance for the very first time. He had pedaled forward wobbly but free, turning back to me with a face lit up by pure, unfiltered joy. "Did you see me, Dad? Did you see I had seen?" God help me, I had never been prouder. My chest had nearly burst that day, not with pain, but with the kind of love that makes life worth every sacrifice. That child, the boy with my stubborn chin and his mother's gentle eyes, was gone, replaced by a man who now looked at me not as a father, but as a liability, an obstacle, a burden to be erased. The thought slithered in dark and corrosive. Maybe I really did become a burden. It spread through me like poison, subtle but devastating. Had I been too demanding, too needy? When I called from the hospital asking when they might visit, had I sounded desperate, clingy? Did my voice carry that thin edge of loneliness that made people pull away instead of draw closer? When I said I missed them, did it sound like manipulation instead of truth? The questions dug into me sharper than the scar across my chest. The pain intensified, twisting through my body until I could no longer tell where the physical ended and the emotional began. They had fused a single unbearable weight pressing down, crushing everything I thought I knew about family, about loyalty, about love itself. Weren't these bonds supposed to be sacred? Unbreakable. The one thing that held us apart from animals who devour their own? Through the glass, life moved on. A lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street, the steady drone of blades slicing grass. Ordinary, comforting, cruel. How could the world keep spinning when mine had cracked open to reveal this rot I forced myself to breathe, the way the physical therapist had taught me after surgery in Out Slow Steady? Count, focus, anchor yourself. But this wasn't rehab. This wasn't about regaining strength. This was about staying alive. The morning light streamed through the window, cutting the room into rectangles of golden shadow. Beyond it stood Hal's house, neat and dependable, his vegetable garden lined in careful rows. Hal, who had waved from his porch just last week, concern etched into his weathered face. "How are you holding up, buddy? Need anything from the store?" If only he knew. If only he could see me now, his neighbor trapped in his own bedroom like an animal penned for slaughter. I pressed my palm flat against the carpet and pushed, fighting the dizziness that made the room tilt and sway. My body screamed for me to stop, to lie still, to let the pain consume me. But I couldn't. Not yet. The window was only 12 feet away. 12 feet, yet it stretched before me like 12 miles of desert. Still, it was forward. It was hope. It was the only direction left. I crawled inch by inch, dragging myself across Sarah's carpet. Each pull of my arms tore at my chest, each movement sending waves of fire through my body. The scar pulled tight under the bandages, hot and raw, but I kept going. Because the alternative was surrender. The alternative was letting Ethan win. Furniture legs became my handholds, my lifelines as I clawed my way toward the window. My fingers trembled, slick with sweat as I reached the latch. It was stuck, sealed by layers of old paint, stubborn as stone. My hands shook harder as I worked at it. Nails digging, sweat dripping into my eyes, breath coming in ragged bursts. The world narrowed to that latch, that barrier, that chance. If I could force it open, Hal might see. If Hal saw, I might live. And if I lived, Ethan's plan would crumble. When the latch finally gave way with a rusty squeal, it was as if the house itself had exhaled. The morning air rushed in sharp and cool, striking my face like a benediction from a merciful God. For the first time in what felt like hours, I wasn't suffocating in the stale recycled air of my prison. My lungs expanded greedily, aching yet grateful for the simple gift of oxygen. Below Hal's garden stretched out in quiet order, the neat rows of tomatoes and peppers glistening with dew under the golden wash of early sunlight. It looked so normal, so heartbreakingly ordinary, as though the world hadn't tilted on its axis in my small locked bedroom. And there he was, Hal Jenkins, kneeling in his familiar old Northwestern University t-shirt, canvas gloves already stained with earth brow furrowed in concentration as he inspected the undersides of his pepper plants for pests. Hal, I croaked, the sound tearing out of my throat like gravel. Weeks of intubation had left my voice little more than a rasp, and panic only tightened it further. "Hal, help me." He stilled, head snapping up at once. The sun caught his glasses, forcing him to squint until he finally made me out, clinging to the window frame like a drowning man. "Oscar," his voice carried, startled but steady. "What happened?" Relief flooded me so fiercely it nearly unmoored me. To see another human face, to be acknowledged after the crushing silence of abandonment, it felt like being pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, shame and gratitude colliding. Call an ambulance. Right now. I feel terrible." Hal didn't hesitate. He dropped his trowel into the soil with a muted thud and pushed himself to his feet, brushing dirt from his knees in a single practice motion. "What's wrong? Should I come up there?" "No," I blurted, terrified of wasting even a second. "I'm locked in. Can't reach my phone." The words tumbled out clumsily, desperate. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the whole truth, that my own son had sealed me in here like some inconvenient relic, that the boy Hal had once congratulated at his wedding had turned into the kind of man who would leave his father to die. No, I couldn't stain Ethan's name, not yet. The door jammed, I lied, swallowing bile at the cowardice of it. Even now, even with death clawing at my chest, some part of me still wanted to protect him. Please, just call. I think it's my heart again. I'm calling right now. Hold on. Hal was already striding toward his house with the crisp, decisive movements of a man who'd weathered countless small crises in the classroom. Respond first, ask questions later. That was Hal. I clutched the window frame with trembling hands, leaning out farther than my body had any right to. The cool air rushed against my sweat-slick skin, cutting through the suffocating fear. Below, Hal vanished into his kitchen, and I caught the faintest glimpse of him through the glass phone pressed tight to his ear, his free hand slicing the air as he spoke with urgency to the emergency dispatcher. Help. Help was coming. After the longest, cruelest hour of my life, an hour of betrayal silence, and the gnawing certainty that I might simply be allowed to slip away, help was finally on its way. But as relief surged through me, another fear rooted itself in my chest. What would happen when the paramedics arrived? Would Ethan let them through the door? Or would he stand in the hallway, smooth and persuasive, weaving some convincing tale about a confused old man who cried wolf? He had always been polished professional, the kind of person strangers trusted without question. My son, my betrayer. They're on their way, Hal's voice rang out as he reappeared at his back door, louder now, firm and steady. Ambulance should be here in 10 minutes. You just hang tight, Oscar. 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. I could survive 10 minutes. I had to. Through the wavering glass, I saw Hal hesitate, glance once at his half-tended garden, then abandon it altogether. He strode to the front of his property, planting himself like a sentinel, where he could watch the street scanning for flashing lights. And in that moment, my neighbor standing guard, my lungs burning with fragile hope, I clung to life with the raw determination of a man who utterly refused to die, according to his son's timetable. The sight of Hal standing guard outside this neighbor, who was little more than a casual acquaintance, yet now proved to care more about my survival than my own flesh and blood, pierced straight through me. My throat tightened, and before I knew it, hot tears slid down my cheeks. What a cruel twist of fate that a man I'd shared no more than polite nods and neighborly small talk with was now the only shield between me and oblivion. The pain in my chest had dulled, as if my body, sensing hope, granted me a temporary reprieve. Perhaps it was adrenaline. Perhaps it was simply the stubborn instinct to live, to hold on until rescue finally arrived. And then footsteps. They weren't rushed or careless. No. They were heavy, deliberate, echoing up the staircase like the tolling of a funeral bell. Each creak of the floorboard turned my fragile relief into shards of ice. My heart stopped for a beat, then slammed violently against my ribs. Ethan, my son, had heard me. He knew. He was coming. The footsteps halted just outside my door. Silence pressed down like a suffocating weight. I could picture him there, face twisted in cold calculation, deciding just how far he was willing to go. The pause was worse than the sound. My breath caught in my throat. Then came the sharp, metallic click of the lock. The door didn't merely open, it exploded inward, crashing against the wall, with a violence that made me flinch. Ethan stood framed in the doorway, no longer my son, but a stranger, with eyes wild and lips pulled back in a snarl. His face, once boyish and filled with laughter, was now a mask of unrestrained fury. Not even during the worst of his teenage rebellions had I seen this expression. This was something primal, something dangerous. "What did you do, you old fool?" His voice thundered through the room, raw and venomous. Instinctively, I scrambled backward, dragging myself away from the window that moments earlier had felt like my salvation. My heart thundered so hard I thought the stitches from my surgery would tear. "I need help," I gasped, my voice trembling. "Let me go." But Ethan crossed the room in just 3 strides, impossibly fast, impossibly strong. His hands clamped down on my shoulders with brutal force, hauling me upright. His grip was merciless fingers, pressing directly into the tender site of my surgical wound until I cried out. Up close, I could see it all, the anger, the fear, the desperation swirling in his eyes. "Listen to me carefully," he hissed, his voice low and lethal. "If you tell anyone about this, I'll make your life hell. You're insane. I choked the betrayal, cutting deeper than his grip ever could. You're my son. He leaned closer, eyes blazing. I'm your son who's waited for his inheritance too long. The words burst from him like a dam breaking, years of bitterness flooding out. Do you know what it's like watching you cling to life while Celeste and I scrape by? Living in this house like we're charity cases, he shoved me backward with sudden violence. My body hit the bed frame hard, rattling my bones. Pain screamed through my chest, radiating from the scar that still hadn't healed. I bit back a groan, staring up at the man towering over me, the man who was supposed to be my child, my legacy, my blood. But all I saw was a stranger wearing Ethan's face. Charity cases, I wheezed, forcing air into my lungs. This is your home. I never asked for rent. Never. Because you wanted us trapped. His voice rose, cracking with hysteria. You wanted us dependent, leashed to your goodwill. Well, guess what, Dad? I found a way out. He sneered, almost triumphant. We found a way out. The emphasis slammed into me like a physical blow. We, not just him, Celeste. The woman who once looked at me with kindness, who called me Papa on their wedding day, who sent me birthday cards in her neat looping script. She wasn't just standing by. She was part of this. She had been waiting for me to die too. How long? The question escaped as nothing more than a whisper. My lips barely moved. My heart already knew the answer, but my soul still begged for denial. How long have you been planning this? Ethan laughed, but there was no humor, only venom. Since your first heart attack, when the doctor said you might not make it. That's when I realized we could finally be free of this albatross around our necks. Each word was a knife. Each word severed the fragile thread still connecting father to son. He moved toward the window, then peering down at Hal's garden with the frantic eyes of a cornered animal. His shoulders heaved, his breath quick and ragged. Who did you call? What did you tell them? I forced myself to sit straighter, though every movement sent a flare of pain through my chest. I told them the truth, that I was dying, because I am. No, he spun on me, jabbing a finger so close to my face it blurred. You told them lies. You painted yourself as a victim, when all you really are is a stubborn old man who refuses to accept reality. My throat tightened, my breath catching, but I forced the words out steady and unshakable. The reality is that my son wants me dead, and for the first time I saw the flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but fear. The reality hit me like a cruel verdict, 70 years old, a failing heart, and in my own son's eyes, no business holding up what he called progress. Ethan's professional mask, the polite and polished exterior he wore to the world, was gone completely now. In its place stood something raw and unsettling, a calculating predator who had finally bared his teeth. That house, he sneered, eyes narrowing, like he was already counting the bricks, is worth $300,000. Do you have any idea what Celeste and I could do with that money? The casual way he spoke of my death as if it were just a simple financial transaction, a merger, a clean cut on a balance sheet, made my skin crawl. He wasn't speaking to me as his father anymore. I was an asset, a problem to be liquidated. For the first time in all this, nightmare clarity burned through my fear. This wasn't a moment of madness, some temporary storm brought on by stress or desperation. No, this was who my son truly was. The man who had once run barefoot across this yard, laughing as I pushed him on the swing, now looked at me and saw nothing but an obstacle to his financial success. I could change my will, I said softly, my voice trembling, but every word edged with steel. Leave everything to charity. The effect was instantaneous. His face drained of color, then flushed crimson with fury. His fists clenched, his shoulders squared. For a terrifying heartbeat, I thought he might strike me. His muscles coiled like a man ready to pounce. His eyes burning with something that was not just rage, but terror. The terror of losing control, of losing the prize he thought already belonged to him. You wouldn't dare, he spat, his voice breaking at the edges. Try me, I answered, surprising even myself with the firmness in my tone. The room seemed to tighten around us, air thinning under the weight of what hung between father and son. Then, like a blade cutting through the suffocating silence, came the sound that saved me. Or perhaps doomed us both. Sirens. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The rising wail of emergency vehicles growing louder with every second. Ethan's head whipped toward the window. His expression shifted, instantly rage collapsing into panic calculation, flickering across his face like frantic lightning. "How long ago did you call?" he hissed. "I didn't call anyone." The words came out steady, though my chest felt as if it might burst. "Technically true," I added, forcing the truth into the air. My neighbor saw me in distress. "You lying!" He cut himself off as the sirens swelled closer now, undeniable. I could almost hear his mind racing, gears grinding as he calculated odds and outcomes with the same cold precision he used at his accounting desk. Every second the sirens grew nearer, tightened the noose around his plans. "Here's what's going to happen," he said at last, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that chilled me more than his shouting ever had. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "You're going to tell them you had a panic attack, that you got confused, that you thought the door was locked when it wasn't. And if I don't," my voice was fragile but steady enough. That smile. I had seen him smile 1,000 times in his life, birthday mornings, graduation day, his wedding, but this was different. Cold, empty, predatory. "Then your final years," he murmured, "will be very, very unpleasant. I control your medications, your meals, your access to the outside world. Cross me and I'll make sure you learn exactly how powerless you really are." The sirens were nearly upon us now, maybe 2 blocks away. Through the window I saw Hal at the end of his driveway, waving frantically, directing them toward our house like a lighthouse guiding a ship through a storm. Ethan straightened abruptly, running his hands through his hair, tugging at his shirt, pulling the mask of professionalism back onto his face. In an instant, he was again the respectable, clean-cut man everyone trusted, the kind of man whose word carried weight with police, doctors, paramedics. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame, and looked back at me with that same chilling smile. "Remember what I said, Dad? Every word of it." He stepped halfway out, then leaned back in his tone, cruelly casual. "Oh, and the door." His eyes gleamed with mockery. "It was never locked. You just forgot how to open it. Old age, you know. So confusing for everyone involved." And then the final sound, piercing, undeniable, tore through the morning air. The sirens wailed outside louder than ever, slicing through the quiet suburban street like a knife through flesh. From my window, I watched the ambulance turn onto our street, red and white lights, spinning, painting, urgent streaks of color across the manicured lawns. Help had arrived, but whether it was salvation or just the beginning of another battle, I did not yet know. Relief swept over me in a tidal wave so sudden and overwhelming that my knees nearly gave way beneath me. For the first time in what felt like hours, I let myself believe that perhaps I might be saved. But then my breath caught. I saw Ethan step out of the front door, below his movements, sharp, deliberate, calculated. In a matter of seconds, he had transformed. His hair was smoothed back neatly, his shirt tugged straight, his face arranged into the flawless mask he had perfected over the years, the mask of respectability, of authority, of the devoted son. He looked every bit the picture of concern and competence, the kind of man you would instinctively trust in a crisis. The ambulance drew up to the curb with a loud hydraulic hiss, its flashing lights cutting across the manicured lawns of the neighborhood. 2 paramedics climbed out, moving with the urgency of people for whom every second can mean the difference between life and death. The woman, her graying hair tied back in a practical bun, carried herself with quiet authority. The younger man beside her, his arms full of equipment, radiated the restless energy of someone newer to the job, but no less determined. Ethan intercepted them before they could even step onto the porch. His timing was impeccable, almost rehearsed. "Officers, I think there has been some kind of mistake," he began, his tone perfectly modulated, polite confusion dripping from every syllable. The woman barely paused as she scanned the house with sharp, assessing eyes. "We received a call from this address. Cardiac emergency, possible distress." Ethan let out a well-practiced sigh, the sound of a son burdened with a parent's decline. "Yes, well, my father has been having some confusion since his surgery." His voice softened, laced with that carefully crafted mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. "He sometimes imagines emergencies that aren't really happening." It was a performance so polished it made my skin crawl. He was already erasing me, already rewriting the narrative before their eyes. In his story, I wasn't a man in danger. I was an old fool, my mind failing me, my words nothing more than the ramblings of a confused senior. Rage surged in my chest, so hot and sharp, it burned brighter than the pain that had been gnawing at my heart all morning. He would not silence me, not this time. "I'm here," I shouted from the upstairs window, every ounce of strength I had pouring into the words. My voice cracked, but it carried. "Up here, help me." Both paramedics froze for half a beat, then looked up together. Their eyes locked on me, sweat-soaked, pale, clutching the windowsill as if it were the only thing anchoring me to this earth. Their professional instincts flared instantly. "Sir, are you experiencing chest pain?" The woman called, her voice sharp with urgency, but steady, controlled. "Yes," I gasped. "And I'm locked in my room. Can't get out." For the first time, Ethan's mask slipped. Just for a moment. Panic flared in his eyes like a crack in glass before he forced it down, smoothing his features again. "He gets confused about the door handle. Sometimes," he explained quickly, a nervous laugh tacked on at the end. "Old age, you know. I'll just go up and know." The word landed like a hammer blow. It came from the younger paramedic, his voice cutting clean through Ethan's explanation. "Sir, open the door immediately." The young man ordered, his tone not open to interpretation. "We need direct access to the patient." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, a flicker of frustration darting across his face. He tried again, forcing charm into his tone. "But really, this isn't necessary. If you'll just let me. This is not a request." The woman's voice had shifted entirely now. The professional courtesy was gone, replaced by an edge of authority that brooked no argument. "We have a patient reporting cardiac distress and claiming to be trapped. You will provide immediate access or we will call for police backup." Silence stretched for a heartbeat, the weight of her words hanging in the humid air. From my window, I watched Ethan's face unravel in real time. A dozen emotions flickered across it: calculation, desperation, fury, resignation. His jaw worked furiously. His eyes darted toward the ambulance, the neighbors, the paramedics who would not bend to his charm. For once, his lies had collided with something immovable, the uncompromising reality of medical protocol. And in that instant, I saw it, the first crack in his control, the tiniest fracture in the fortress he had built around his greed and ambition. "Of course," Ethan said at last, though his voice was tight, brittle, the edges fraying under the pressure. "I'll unlock the door right away." But he didn't move. Instead, he lingered there on the front lawn, frozen in place, as if his shoes had taken root in the grass. His eyes darted back and forth, his jaw, working mind churning frantically as he searched for some clever escape hatch, some way to twist the situation back into his control. Seconds slipped away, seconds I could feel in the frantic pounding of my weakened heart. The paramedics noticed. Of course they did. "Sir, unlock the door now," the woman said sharply, her hand already hovering near the radio clipped to her shoulder. "Or we will assume this is a case of elder abuse and call law enforcement." The phrase landed like a thunderclap. Elder abuse. The words lingered in the heavy air, sharp as a blade, undeniable as a brand. I saw Ethan physically flinch, his entire body recoiling as though she had struck him. His perfectly polished world, built so carefully on charm and denial, was crumbling piece by piece right before strangers who could not be manipulated. His mask of control was slipping, and he knew it. Right away he muttered again, but still his feet refused to obey him, as though his body itself resisted surrender. The male paramedic had no patience left. He lifted his radio, speaking into it with clipped, unwavering authority. "Dispatch, we need police backup at this location. Possible elder abuse situation. Family member preventing access to patient." That broke Ethan's paralysis. No, that's not necessary," he burst out, his voice tinged with panic. His composure cracked, and for once the mask fell away, exposing raw desperation beneath. He all but stumbled toward the front door keys, jangling wildly in his shaking hand. "I'll open it right now." From my window above, I watched him vanish inside. Moments later, the sound of his footsteps rose up the staircase, heavy, deliberate, slower than they ought to have been. Every step thudded like a reluctant admission of defeat, each one pulling him closer to the truth he could no longer deny. The lock clicked. Metal against metal. The door swung open. "Dad." His voice floated into the room, that same rehearsed tone of concern laid thick like paint over rot. "The paramedics are here to check on you." He said it as though he had orchestrated their arrival, as though this was part of his careful plan. But I did not answer. I didn't need to. The sound of professional footsteps climbing the stairs behind him was answer enough. The shifting of medical bags, the rattle of equipment designed to save a life, not manipulate a story, was more powerful than any words I could summon. And then she appeared. The female paramedic stepped through my doorway, her gaze sharp, experience, taking everything in at once. The beads of sweat on my brow, the pallor of my skin, the tremor in my hands, the locked door that had supposedly confused me. She saw the truth, saw it all. "Hello, Oscar," she said softly, her tone steady but full of compassion. "I'm Sarah Chen, and this is my partner, Mike Rodriguez. We're here to help." Sarah, the same name as my late wife. The sound of it broke something in me, not in pain, but in relief. I clung to it like a lifeline, like a whisper from beyond telling me I was not alone in this fight. I chose to take it as a sign. The next minutes blurred into a cascade of sensation and motion, the hiss of oxygen as a mask settled over my face, the prick of an IV needle slipping expertly into my vein, the rhythmic beeping of machines coming alive around me, measuring every fragile beat of my failing heart. Bright lights, urgent voices, glimpses of faces leaning over me, calm but serious. And through it all, the quiet, undeniable truth pulsed beneath the noise I had been heard. I had been believed. Ethan's lies could no longer seal me away. Through it all, when one thought circled in my mind like a predator, relentless and merciless. My own son had tried to kill me. The thought stalked me in every moment of silence, waiting at the edges of my consciousness, ready to lunge whenever I closed my eyes. It wasn't a fleeting suspicion, it was a truth I could feel in my bones, in the icy dread that wrapped itself around my chest whenever I remembered the locked door. On the second day after the chaos of tubes, beeping monitors, and urgent voices had softened into the steadier rhythm of recovery, Dr. Laura Simmons appeared. She came quietly, but her presence filled the room. She was younger than I had imagined, perhaps in her mid-50s, but her face bore the calm confidence of someone who had walked through storms and refused to bow to them. Her eyes were clear, direct, and steady eyes that had seen too much to be easily deceived. "Oscar," she said gently as she settled into the chair beside my bed clipboard, resting lightly on her lap. "Your condition was critical when you arrived. Another hour, maybe even just minutes longer, without treatment, and we would be having a very different conversation right now." Her words landed with the weight of truth, undeniable and sobering. I swallowed the dryness in my throat, making my voice rasp when I finally answered. "Thank you for saving me." The words slipped out automatically, but even as I spoke them, I felt the gravity behind them. Someone had chosen to save me. A stranger, a doctor, had cared enough to intervene and keep me breathing when my own son had chosen the opposite. Dr. Simmons inclined her head in acknowledgement, but her gaze didn't soften. Instead, it sharpened, probing deeper. "The paramedics mentioned some unusual circumstances," she said carefully. "A locked door, a family member attempting to prevent access." The air between us grew heavy. My pulse quickened. I met her eyes, forcing steadiness into my voice, though inside I was trembling. "My son and I had a misunderstanding." The word felt poisonous as it left my lips. A misunderstanding. As if attempted murder could be painted over with a flimsy coat of family politeness. As if betrayal that deep could be diminished to something so trivial. But I wasn't ready, not yet, to drag Ethan's name through the mud to expose him fully and tear apart what fragile threads still held the family's reputation together. Not until I had a plan. Not until I was strong enough to face what came next. "I see Dr. Simmons," said at last. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. She made a note in my chart, the scratch of her pen loud in the stillness of the room. Then as she stood, she added, "We'll be keeping you under observation. The stress on your cardiovascular system was severe. We want to ensure there are no further complications." And just like that, she was gone. 2 days followed. 2 endless, suffocating days lying in that sterile hospital bed, staring up at the identical white ceiling tiles until they seemed to blur into patterns of accusation. 2 days where time became a punishment, forcing me to sift through the wreckage of my life. Every conversation I'd had with Ethan, every look, every decision. I replayed them again and again, searching desperately for signs, clues I had missed, and slowly, with the painful clarity of hindsight, I realized the truth. Ethan hadn't snapped in some sudden fit of rage or weakness. No, he had been patient, calculating, waiting. He had been engineering my death for months, perhaps even years. The realization hollowed me out, leaving me raw. The nurses came and went, their voices kind, their hands gentle, their smiles genuine. Their compassion was a sharp and painful contrast to the coldness I had endured inside my own home. Each time they checked on me, their presence whispered a truth Ethan had tried to erase. I mattered. My life mattered. One evening, as she adjusted the IV line, Jennifer, the night nurse, asked softly, "Do you have any visitors we should expect, Mr. Reynolds?" I hesitated only a moment before answering. No. My voice was flat, but then I added with quiet finality, "And there won't be any." Her brows lifted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. "No family. None that matter." I said each word tasting bitter but true. The phone on the bedside table remained stubbornly silent. Not a single call from Ethan pretending to check on my condition. Not even a bouquet from Celeste offering hollow sympathy. Nothing. Just the steady mechanical beeping of the monitors keeping track of my fragile heart. Just the soft hum of the machines breathing with me in the sterile quiet. And my thoughts, always circling back darker with each passing hour. Ethan must answer for what he did. The predator thought no longer circled it, stood in front of me now waiting. The thought that had circled me like a predator finally crystallized during my second night in the hospital. Sleep refused to come, and in its absence, rage burned itself down into something colder, sharper like metal hardened in fire. It was no longer the raw, chaotic fury of a father betrayed. It had transformed into purpose. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about justice. It was about making sure that what Ethan had done to me could never be repeated on another vulnerable parent, another father who had given everything only to be treated as a disposable burden. For the first time, I saw my son for what he truly was. Ethan hadn't seen me as his father in a long time. To him, I wasn't flesh and blood or memory or the man who carried him on my shoulders when he was 5 years old and afraid of the dark. I was nothing more than a line on his balance sheet. $300,000. That was the number stamped on my existence. That was the arithmetic Ethan had performed in the silence of his mind, the value of my house minus the cost of keeping me alive a little longer. To him, my death was not a tragedy, but a financial decision. But Ethan had made one fatal miscalculation. He had let me live. By the morning of June 13th, as sunlight spilled weakly through the blinds of my hospital room, I had a plan. Not the hot-blooded revenge of a man lashing out blindly, but the measured, deliberate strategy of someone who had spent 68 long years learning exactly how the world worked. Ethan was clever, no one could deny that, but his cleverness was poisoned by arrogance. He believed he was dealing with a confused old man, someone who would either die quietly or worse, shrink into silence, too ashamed to expose the betrayal of his own family. He was wrong, so very wrong. "You're looking much better, doctor," Simmons remarked during her final check, her voice calm, professional. "Heart rhythm is stable. Blood pressure is under control. I think we can discharge you this afternoon." "Good," I replied, my tone steady though beneath it ran a current of steel. "I have things to take care of at home." Her pen hovered over the discharge papers. She hesitated, her eyes meeting mine, searching. "Oscar," she said gently, "if there are any ongoing issues at home, there are resources available. Social services, elder advocacy groups. You don't have to go through," I smiled, though the expression never reached my eyes. It wasn't warmth I offered her, but a mask. "I can handle my family situation." "Doctor," I said quietly, each word deliberate, "but thank you." At 2:00 p.m., I walked out of Northwest Community Hospital with nothing but a small bag of medications in my hand and a heart that beat steady and strong. Stronger perhaps than it had in years. The taxi driver who picked me up was talkative, the kind of man who filled silence with chatter. He spoke about the weather, about how the summer had been kinder than last year, about the rising cost of gas. I nodded politely, but his words barely registered. My mind was already far ahead of the car, already rehearsing the phone calls I would make, the preparations I needed to put in place, the steps that would ensure Ethan faced the full weight of consequences he believed he could escape. When the taxi pulled up to my house, it looked exactly as it had 3 days earlier. The same neatly trimmed lawn, the same curtains drawn just slightly too tight, the same front porch where I had once stood proud of the home I'd built for my family. But everything had changed. This was no longer my home. This was a crime scene. And I was no longer the victim. I was the prosecutor. The taxi pulled away with a quiet purr, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline. Ordinary, normal. But nothing about this moment was normal. Ethan's car was absent from the driveway. No doubt he was at work playing the role of the grieving son, spinning his story of how his poor father had suffered yet another medical emergency. A mask for the world, polished and flawless. Celeste's sedan was gone too, likely parked at her office downtown, where she smiled through meetings and pitched marketing strategies as though she hadn't conspired in silence against me. Perfect. I needed the privacy. What came next required precision, secrecy, and time. When I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the house felt different. Colder, hollow. The walls that had once held laughter now seemed to lean inward, oppressive, as though they too bore witness to the treachery that had unfolded here. It was no longer a place of family. It was a place of evidence, and I was ready to begin gathering it. The same furniture sat in its familiar places. The same smiling faces stared back at me from the family photos that lined the walls. They had been carefully returned to their spots by guilt, perhaps, or simply by the need to maintain appearances. But the air told a different story. The atmosphere was no longer one of warmth or sanctuary. It was suffused with tension, every corner echoing with betrayal. This was not my home anymore. It was a stage, a crime scene dressed up in domestic comfort, and I was both the victim and the prosecutor. I took the stairs slowly, not because of weakness, but because I wanted each step to remind me of the night I had nearly died on them. My heart beat steady, not fragile, as Ethan had counted on, but driven by a colder resolve. At the top, I paused in the hallway, my eyes drifting toward the bedroom door that had once been mine, once a refuge. Now it was a monument to my son's cruelty. The window was still cracked open, just as I'd left it after my desperate cries for help. The faint scent of summer air mixed with something darker, memory, fear, betrayal. On the carpet, I could almost see the imprint where I had collapsed lungs, burning chest, seizing while Ethan debated whether my life was worth another breath. That invisible mark would never fade, not for me. From my dresser, I pulled open the second drawer. Beneath old handkerchiefs and a worn leather wallet lay the small digital recorder I'd bought years ago. Back then, Sarah had asked me to record her childhood stories, little treasures for grandchildren who would never come. My hands lingered on it for a moment, a pang of sorrow cutting through the steel of my resolve. What had been meant for love, for memory, would now be used for justice. The recorder was small silver, no bigger than a pack of cards. I held it in my palm, testing its weight like a weapon. A quiet weapon, but powerful nonetheless. I switched it on, spoke a few words, and replayed them. My voice came back crisp and sharp, each syllable clear. Perfect. Technology had come a long way since my working days, long enough to catch a killer in the act. Next, I gathered my evidence. Papers rustled in my hands like whispers of truth. My medical records, black and white proof of my cardiac crisis. Discharge notes, Dr. Simmons's careful words, documenting the unusual circumstances. It was all there, cold and undeniable. But I knew this alone wouldn't bury Ethan. No, I needed his own words, his arrogance, his confession. At exactly 3:30, I made the most important call of my life. Arlington Heights Police Department. How can I help you? My name is Oscar Reynolds, I said, my voice steady, my pulse calm. I need to report an elder abuse case. The operator's tone shifted sharper, more attentive. What type of abuse, sir? Attempted murder. False imprisonment. The words fell heavy in the air, but I spoke them without hesitation. My son locked me in my room during a medical emergency and refused to call for help. There was a pause, the weight of what I'd said hanging between us. Sir, when did this occur? 3 days ago, June 11th, I have medical documentation and witness statements available. And where are you now, Mr. Reynolds? At home. I hesitated, then added deliberately, the perpetrator lives here with me. That got her attention. I could hear the urgency sharpen. Are you in immediate danger? Not immediate, no. But if you send officers tonight around 7:30, you'll have additional evidence. Additional evidence? I allowed myself a grim smile. A recorded confession if everything goes according to plan. The line went quiet for a moment, the operator no doubt weighing my words. Then carefully, Mr. Reynolds, are you sure? I cut her off. Just be here at 7:30. You'll see for yourself. Then I hung up. Too much explanation would make me sound rehearsed, suspicious. Better to let the truth unfold naturally, as damning as a spotlight. I slipped the recorder into my shirt pocket, positioning it just right. The microphone sat close enough to catch every word. I tested angles, walking around the room, speaking, replaying, adjusting, until the sound came through perfectly. Each test made my pulse quicken. Soon his words would be his undoing. By the time 6:00 came, the low hum of an engine reached my ears. Ethan's car. Showtime. I sat in my chair, the one he'd so casually claimed as his own, while I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my life. Now it became a throne of judgment. My judgment. The front door creaked open with its familiar groan. Footsteps crossed the threshold. Then his voice casual, just a shade too light. Dad, you're home. Where else would I be? I said evenly. He stepped into the living room doorway, his suit still crisp from the office, his expression carefully arranged into one of mild concern. But behind his eyes I caught the flicker of surprise, of irritation. He hadn't expected me here, and he certainly hadn't expected me ready. The trap had been set. The performance was flawless if you didn't know what to look for. Ethan carried himself with the same practiced composure he'd used his entire adult life, the same smooth tone he used in boardrooms and social gatherings. But to me, to the father who had once known every flicker of his expression, every twitch of his jaw, the cracks were obvious. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice carefully modulated, professional concern painted over something sharper. The hospital said you were stable. Stable enough, maybe, to have some interesting conversations. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice level, almost casual, though my pulse throbbed steadily beneath the calm surface. About inheritance, about patience, about sons who spend their lives waiting for their fathers to die, instead of living with integrity. For a moment, just a moment, his mask slipped. A tightening around his eyes, a hesitation no longer than a heartbeat, but enough. Enough to tell me the truth was right there, festering behind his words. I don't know what you mean, he said too quickly. Yes, I answered softly, you do. I let a small smile spread across my face, not warm, not paternal, but deliberate. A smile of recognition, of quiet certainty. I saw the moment he recognized it too, saw the flash of realization in his eyes. Something had shifted in me since his betrayal, and he could see it now. I was no longer the man he thought he could bully, manipulate, discard. We both know exactly what you did, I said. The question is whether you're man enough to admit it. Through the living room window, past the familiar lace curtains his mother had once adored, I caught sight of a police cruiser turning onto our street. Slow, measured, precise, exactly the timing I had arranged. The blue and white silhouette rolled closer, steady as justice itself. Ethan followed my gaze. His composure faltered. He froze mid-breath. His voice, when it came, was a whisper stripped of authority. What did you do? I reached into my shirt pocket, fingers, brushing the recorder's smooth silver surface. With a click, I shut it off. Justice, son, I said, my voice low, steady. Something you forgot to teach yourself. The house seemed to hold its breath. At 6:30 sharp, Ethan's sedan rumbled into the driveway, punctual as ever. A moment later, Celeste's car pulled in behind his, its engine ticking as it cooled. Car doors slammed shut with the easy arrogance of people returning to a territory they believed was still theirs. The front door opened with its familiar squeak, the same sound that had once welcomed me home after long days of work, back when this house had been a place of love instead of lies. Dad, Ethan's voice floated into the living room, laced with that false concern he had been perfecting for days. "You're home already," I didn't rise. I remained seated in my chair. My chair, not his hands, folded calmly in my lap. The recorder pressed warm against my chest, its tiny red light, invisible but relentless, capturing every syllable. "This is my house, son," I said evenly. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his business suit still immaculate, his mask of professional competence firmly in place. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room, scanning for threats he could not name, but clearly felt. "What were you thinking leaving the hospital so soon?" he asked, forcing authority back into his tone. "The doctors said the doctors cleared me." I cut him off, my voice calm, conversational. "Clean bill of health. Amazing what surviving attempted murder does for a man's constitution." Color drained from his face, first pale as ash, then flushing hot with anger. "That's not what happened," he snapped, too fast, too defensive. "And you know it." "Do I?" I tilted my head, the faintest of smiles curling my lips. The shift of power I had waited 3 long days for finally surged into place. "Refresh my memory, Ethan. Tell me again what happened when you locked me in my room and refused to call for help while I was dying." He swallowed hard, faltered. "You got confused. The door wasn't locked. You just couldn't $300 The number landed in the room like a stone, breaking still water, its ripples widening until there was no sound but the echo of his own guilt. "That's what you said my house was worth," I continued, my voice steady as a judge delivering sentence. "That's what you and Celeste have been planning to get your hands on. The value of brick and wood subtracted by the cost of keeping me alive." Behind him, Celeste appeared in the hallway, grocery bags balanced in her arms. Her eyes flicked over the scene, her husband's rigid shoulders, my calm defiance, and in an instant, she understood. Without a word, she slipped away toward the kitchen, too shrewd to stand in the blast radius of a man's collapsing world. "You don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said, but the professional polish had drained from his voice, leaving it raw, frayed, threaded with desperation. I leaned forward slightly, letting silence stretch, letting him hear the certainty in my breathing. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." I leaned forward slightly, watching the flicker of fear flash across Ethan's face before he managed to bury it. Even that tiny flinch was enough. It told me everything. My voice was steady, low, deliberate, like a scalpel cutting into the truth he'd tried so hard to conceal. "I know, Ethan," I said, my eyes locked on his. "I know you've been waiting for me to die. I know you look at me and see nothing but a wall standing between you and the life you think you deserve. I know that in your heart, I'm not your father anymore. I'm just an obstacle to your financial freedom. And I know you're willing to let me die or even hasten it if it means you get what you want." His mask cracked. The words that slipped out were not calm, not practiced, but venomous. "Shut up." His voice was low, trembling with anger he could no longer hide. "Just shut up, old man." Perfect. The recorder in my pocket was catching every poisoned syllable. I leaned back slightly, my smile thin and cold. "Or what, Ethan? You'll lock me in my room again? Watch me gasp for breath while you wait for silence. Try to finish what you started." I let the words hang for a beat before twisting the knife. "Go on, son. Admit it. You should have let me die, shouldn't you?" The explosion came exactly as I'd anticipated. His face twisted, his voice raw. No longer the polished professional, but the ungrateful child he truly was. "I should have let you die," he roared, spittle flying. "Do you have any idea what it's like watching you cling to life day after day while we're stuck here in this house like prisoners, waiting for you to finally do us all a favor and die?" A chill spread through me, but it wasn't fear. It was a grim, cold satisfaction. Every word, every hateful confession was being recorded, each one a nail in the coffin of his own making. "But you didn't let me die," I whispered, leaning forward again, my voice soft but deadly sharp. "And do you know why? Because you're a coward, Ethan. You wanted me gone, but you didn't have the courage to stay in your own hands. You just sat back hoping nature would do the dirty work while you played the innocent son." "Innocent?" He laughed then, but it wasn't laughter. It was a jagged sound, harsh and empty of all warmth. His eyes gleamed with something feral, unrestrained. "I've been innocent my whole damn life. The good son, the straight-A student, the responsible adult. And what did it get me? Nothing, just trapped in this house at 42, chained to your shadow, forced to live off your charity, waiting for scraps from your table like a beggar. So you decided to take the whole meal, I said, my voice cutting through his rage. His chest heaved and the last remnants of his composure collapsed. I decided to take what should have been mine years ago. His voice cracked no longer, controlled no longer reasonable. The raw truth burned through every word. You had your time, Dad, your house, your life, your choices. Now it's my turn. Through the window I saw movement on the street, the quiet, deliberate timing of the law arriving exactly as I'd planned. My pulse steadied. This was it. Your turn. I rose slowly, every motion, deliberate, reclaiming the space he had tried to steal from me. Despite everything he'd done, my body held firm, powered not by strength, but by justice long delayed. My gaze cut into him, unshakable. Let me tell you something, son. It isn't your turn. It never was. Do you want to know whose turn it really is? The doorbell rang. The sharp chime echoed through the house like the toll of a bell at an execution. Ethan's head snapped toward the sound, his anger twisting instantly into confusion. Who could that be? His voice faltered. I slipped a hand into my shirt pocket, feeling the recorder warm against my chest, its job complete. With a small click, I shut it off. Justice Ethan. I said, my voice calm, resolute, and final. Something you spent your life running from. But it's here now, and it's knocking on our door. The doorbell rang again, followed almost immediately by 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. They weren't the casual taps of a visitor or the hurried banging of a delivery man. They carried weight, the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. The sound seemed to slice through the silence of the house like a judge's gavel, announcing the beginning of a trial. Ethan froze. His face, just moments ago, twisted with rage, shifted rapidly, like clouds rolling across a stormy sky. Confusion flickered first, then dawning comprehension, and finally raw, unfiltered panic. His lips parted, his voice reduced to a trembling whisper. What did you do? I rose from my chair, every step toward the front door, deliberate, measured, as though I'd been preparing for this moment all my life. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with strength, steady, resolute, alive. Through the peephole, I saw them, 2 officers in crisp Arlington Heights police uniforms. A woman in her 40s, her dark hair pulled back, sergeant stripes on her sleeve, eyes sharp and assessing. Beside her stood a younger man, tall, with kind eyes that nonetheless carried the steel of duty. His posture was serious, every movement alert. I opened the door. Oscar Reynolds, the woman asked, her tone firm but not unkind. I'm Sergeant Maria Gonzalez. This is Officer Derek Patel. We received your call about an elder abuse case. Yes, I said, my voice calm, carrying the gravity of truth. I called you. I stepped aside, gesturing them in with the courtesy of a host welcoming honored guests. I have evidence. Behind me came the sound, sharp, shallow, of Ethan, sucking in his breath. The unmistakable sound of a man realizing too late that he'd been walking willingly into a carefully laid snare. Evidence. Sergeant Gonzalez's gaze swept the room with the efficiency of long experience. Her eyes took in everything, the neat living room, the expensive suit clinging too tightly to Ethan's trembling frame. The old man before her, who should have been frail but stood unbent, radiating quiet strength. I reached into my shirt pocket and withdrew the small silver recorder, its weight heavy with truth. Recorded confession, I said, my voice unwavering. Threats of violence. Admission of attempted murder through medical neglect. That's Ethan lurched forward, desperation written in every jerky movement, but stopped short as Officer Patel's hand dropped calmly to his belt. The unspoken warning froze him where he stood. Let's hear it, Sergeant Gonzalez instructed, her tone, leaving no room for argument. I pressed play. Ethan's voice erupted into the room, sharp, bitter, full of venom that could no longer be hidden. I should have let you die. Do you have any idea what it's like watching you cling to life while we're stuck in this house like prisoners? The color drained from Ethan's face. His own words now a noose tightening around his neck. That's taken out of context, he stammered, his voice cracking, brittle with desperation. He was provoking me. He wanted me to snap. Keep listening, I murmured, my tone quiet but unyielding. The recorder crackled, and then Ethan's voice filled the silence once more, every syllable damning. I decided to take what should have been mine years ago. You had your time, Dad. Your house, your life, your choices. It's my turn now. Sergeant Gonzalez's eyes flicked to her partner, the unspoken understanding passing between them like a signal. 20 years on the force had taught her to distinguish truth from fabrication, and this was truth. Sir Officer Patel said, already pulling a notebook from his pocket, his pen poised. His voice was calm, professional. Can you tell us what happened on June 11th? I inhaled, steadying myself, then spoke not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of a man who had waited long enough for justice. My son locked me in my bedroom during a cardiac emergency. He refused to call for medical help. He admitted he wanted me to die so he could inherit my house. When I managed to get the attention of a neighbor, the paramedics found me trapped inside in severe distress. He's lying. Ethan's voice cracked, the words torn from him, ragged and desperate. His carefully polished image was crumbling into dust before their eyes. His gaze darted wildly between the officers, his father the recorder, like a cornered animal searching for any possible escape. But there was none. He's a confused old man, Ethan burst out, his voice high-pitched, frantic and unsteady. He doesn't understand what really happened. But Sergeant Gonzalez was unmoved. Her professionalism was carved into every word. She opened the folder she carried and glanced at her notes before responding. Her tone clipped, firm, undeniable. We have the paramedic report, Mr. Reynolds. Emergency responders documented a locked door and a family member attempting to prevent medical access. That account, she paused, looking directly at Ethan, matches exactly what Mr. Reynolds has told us today. The truth struck the room like a thunderclap. And then from the kitchen doorway, another presence emerged. Celeste. Her hand trembled as it clutched the handle of a suitcase, the leather sides worn with years of use. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She had been listening. She had been deciding. And now finally she had chosen. Officers, she said, her voice breaking, as though each syllable weighed more than she could bear. I can confirm my husband's behavior. Ethan whipped around, disbelief and fury colliding in his expression. His mouth opened, but no sound came, just a strangled gasp. Celeste's gaze darted toward me, then back to the officers. I tried to stop him, she whispered, her voice carrying the ache of failure. But he said it would be better if Oscar just died naturally. He said we'd all be free. The betrayal etched itself across Ethan's face like a jagged scar. Celeste, he shouted, his voice shaking. What are you doing? Her reply was quiet, almost too soft for the room to hold, yet each word cut sharper than any blade. What I should have done 3 days ago. Her eyes shimmering with tears, and something that might have been remorse turned to me. I'm sorry, Oscar. I should have protected you. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then Officer Patel stepped forward, his face expressionless, his handcuffs glinting under the living room light. His voice rang out clear and certain like a verdict delivered from the bench. Ethan Reynolds, you are under arrest for elder abuse, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit harm against a vulnerable adult. Sergeant Gonzalez's tone followed, steady as a drumbeat of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. And there in the very room where Ethan had once torn into Christmas wrapping paper with the joy of a boy who believed in magic, in the very space where he had blown out birthday candles and laughed without shadows, my son stood shackled in chains of his own making. I should have felt shattered, a father watching his only child dragged into disgrace. The weight of it should have bent me, broken me, crushed me into dust. But instead, something stirred deep within me, something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. This isn't over, Ethan shouted, his voice cracking, as the officers guided him toward the front door. Do you hear me? This isn't over. I'm your son, your only family. I straightened, meeting his eyes one last time, and my words were quiet but strong enough to carry across the room, strong enough to follow him as the door closed behind him. No, my son would never have tried to kill me for money. I don't know who you are. The soft click of the door echoed louder than his shouts. And just like that, the last remnants of the family I thought I knew were carried away into the night. Silence fell, heavy but not suffocating. Celeste stood in the hallway, her suitcase still in hand, tears streaming unchecked down her cheeks. She looked so small, so defeated. Her voice broke as she finally spoke. "I'll be gone by tomorrow. Divorce papers will be filed by the end of the week." I nodded, my voice low, even resolute. "That's probably best." She hesitated at the door, her hand on the knob, her shoulders trembling, as though holding back a flood that could drown the room. Her voice came softer, almost pleading, almost like a confession. "He wasn't always like this, you know." The greed, it consumed him. It turned him into something else. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, the memories flashing: Ethan as a boy laughing in the yard, his tiny hand wrapped around mine. His smile before life and greed and ambition twisted it into something unrecognizable. When I opened my eyes again, my answer was simple. I know, and I did know. Somewhere buried deep beneath that angry, desperate man who had stood before me in handcuffs was the little boy I once knew. The boy who used to run across the baseball field with his cap slipping sideways, dirt on his knees and joy lighting up his face. The boy who threw his arms around me after every Little League game, win or lose, whispering, "Did I make you proud, Dad?" That boy was gone, long gone. In his place stood a man I could neither save nor excuse. I would not try. Love had carried me farther than reason ever should have, but love has limits when betrayal festers in its shadow. The house fell silent, then the kind of silence that might have once frightened me, a silence that spoke of absence, of loneliness, of abandonment. But this silence was different. It was not heavy. It was not cruel. It was the blessed quiet of justice, finally served, of truth, finally spoken aloud and acknowledged. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I was truly undeniably alone. And to my own surprise, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. 17 days later, I stood again at the same living room window, where not so long ago I had cried out desperately for help, praying someone would hear. Back then, fear had pressed against my ribs like a vice. Now, as sunlight spilled across the curtains and painted the floor in gold, I felt no fear at all. My eyes drifted to the lawn where a crisp white "for sale" sign swayed gently in the morning breeze. Its letters caught the light, bright and unyielding. To anyone else, it was just a piece of wood stuck in the ground. But to me, it was a symbol, a marker that this chapter was ending and another, cleaner, stronger, freer, was about to begin. The legal proceedings had moved with a swiftness that surprised even me. Ethan's plea bargain spared him prison, but not accountability. 2 years of probation, mandatory community service, and a permanent restraining order that would keep him out of my life for good. The elder abuse conviction would follow him wherever he went, a scarlet letter carved into his record, a fitting consequence for a man who had forgotten that family was meant to be a shelter, not a hunting ground. "Justice has been served," I whispered into the quiet of the empty room. This time the words didn't feel hollow. They sank into me, filling an emptiness I hadn't known could be soothed. For the first time in years, something deep inside me felt at peace. The shrill ring of my phone broke the stillness. I answered, and Margaret's voice, the lawyer I'd come to trust, sounded crisp, professional, but with a gentleness threaded beneath her words. "Oscar, the new will is finalized. Your son is no longer an heir. The proceeds from the house sale will secure your new living arrangements and fund the charitable donation to the Elder Abuse Prevention Society, just as you requested." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. "Thank you, Margaret. This feels right." After ending the call, I walked slowly through the rooms of the house that had been both sanctuary and battlefield. The walls had heard laughter, once had watched birthday candles flicker and Christmas lights twinkle. But they had also borne witness to raised voices, to cruelty, to betrayal sharp enough to cut bone deep. It would sell quickly, the realtor had said. 3 bedrooms in a good neighborhood, a recently updated kitchen on paper, it was perfect. No one buying it would ever know the ghosts it carried. I had spent the past 2 weeks methodically, almost ritualistically, removing every trace of Ethan and Celeste's existence. Their clothes, their books, their photographs, all packed into neat storage boxes, labeled and stacked. I hadn't thrown them away. No, I wasn't like them. I wouldn't discard their lives the way they had tried to discard mine. But I would not keep their shadows here either. Their absence was not emptiness. It was cleansing. The assisted living community I'd chosen was nothing like the grim, gray institutions people whispered about with pity. No, this place was different. Bright, modern, full of color and laughter echoing down its hallways. People who lived there didn't see aging as surrender. They saw it as a chance to live fully in the time that remained. And so would I. I touched the doorframe one last time, my palm resting against the familiar wood, and let myself remember. Then I let it go. The past had already claimed enough of me. The future at last was mine. My deposit was paid, the paperwork signed, and my moving date set for next month. For the first time in years, longer than I cared to admit, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in far too long: excitement for the future. I sat at the kitchen table, pen poised above a notepad, scribbling down lists of things to pack, things to donate, and things I'd finally allow myself to let go of. The air felt lighter somehow, as though even the walls were eager for this change. A sudden knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I rose slowly, expecting perhaps the realtor or a delivery. But when I glanced through the front window, there he was, Hal Jenkins, my neighbor. He stood on the porch with his usual easy posture, balancing a plate covered in aluminum foil. When I opened the door, his face broke into a smile lined with years of kindness. "How are things, Oscar?" he asked gently. "Better than ever," Hal, I replied, surprising even myself with the honesty in my tone. "Much better." His smile widened, warm and genuine. "Sandra made too much pot roast again. Thought you might enjoy some." I accepted the plate with both hands, the smell already comforting. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Hal had become more than just a neighbor these past weeks. Since Ethan's arrest, he had shown up not out of pity, but out of simple human decency, stopping by for coffee, fixing a squeaky hinge on the back door, or just sitting with me when the silence felt too heavy. In those small gestures, he had become the kind of friend family should have been all along. "Would you like to come in?" I asked. "Can't stay long," he said, stepping inside anyway. "But sure." He settled into the old armchair that had once been Ethan's domain, and for a brief moment I felt the strangest sense of poetic justice. "I read in the paper," Hal began cautiously, "that your boy got sentenced. Must be tough." I set the plate on the counter, leaned against the doorway, and met his eyes. "It was the right thing," I said simply. "Sometimes doing right means letting go of what we thought we wanted." Hal nodded, the lines of his face softening with understanding. We didn't need more words. We sat in silence, two old men who had both seen enough of life to know that friendship was not about constant conversation, but presence. Through the window, the world went on. Children played in the street, their laughter carried by the summer breeze, light and unburdened. I watched them run with a freedom I envied, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine what it might feel like to live that freely again. "You know," Hal said after a while, "there's a poker game at the community center Thursday nights. Bunch of us old-timers trying to remember how to bluff. You interested?" A smile tugged at my lips. The idea of laughter around a table of cards, slapping against wood, of belonging somewhere without fear or shame, it felt like a gift. "I'd like that very much," I answered. After Hal left, I walked slowly through the house, room by room. My fingers grazed the walls, touched the familiar furniture, lingered on the window frames that had held so many memories. Some worth keeping, others I was finally ready to release. In 6 weeks, someone else would call this place home. They would fill it with new stories, laughter instead of lies, love instead of resentment. I prayed they would never know the shadows it had once carried. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, landing in the very spot where I had once fought for my life. And yet, instead of fear, I felt warmth, a sense that I had not only survived but claimed something more precious than survival itself. I had won back my dignity, my agency, my right to choose how my story would end. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me back. A text from the assisted living director lit up the screen. "Your apartment is ready whenever you are. Welcome to your new chapter." I typed back with steady hands, "See you soon." Ready to begin. Just then a cardinal landed on the windowsill, its red feathers brilliant against the glass. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Sarah had always said cardinals were messengers, signs that our loved ones were watching over us. Maybe it was only superstition, maybe not. But in that moment, I chose to believe. At 68, I was starting over. Not because I had to, but because I had finally learned that it is never too late to demand better from life. Never too late to reject cruelty, even when it comes in the shape of family. Never too late to fight for justice, even when it costs everything you thought you wanted. The house no longer felt haunted. Instead, it was blessed with truth, with courage, with the quiet triumph of a man who had stood his ground and reclaimed his worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new possibilities, new reasons to choose hope over bitterness. But today, here in this sunlit room, with freedom in my chest and peace in my heart, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. Free, vindicated, ready. And this time, the ending was mine to write. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.